I was just a kid when I was introduced to the Holy Trinity Ace Combat games. 3 games that are considered the golden age of this franchise. Ace Combat 4 Shattered Skies, Ace Combat 5 The Unsung War, and Ace Combat 0 The Belkan War. Although the order in which I first played these titles may have been a little odd, having played 5 first, followed by 4, and then 0, the effect that these games had on me was all the same. There I would be, sitting on that couch in the living room, flying around in an aviation war machine, entirely captivated by that game's world. Whether I was engaging in honorable duels as Mobius 1, the Grim Reaper, leading my squadron to victory as Blaze, the leader of the 4 Wings of Sand Island and later the Rosgri Squadron, or striking down anyone who dared to oppose me as Cypher, the Demon Lord of the Round Table, I was hooked. Pair up masterclass gameplay with an engaging story for each of these games, plus a personal love of aviation, and it's no wonder these games had such an effect on me. Though, even if I played all these games back in the day, I was still young. I still had stars in my eyes. I still thought I could take on the whole world if it dared to oppose me. As a result, while I experienced and sort of understood the stories and themes that each of these games had, because I hadn't been brought down to reality by the world quite yet, I couldn't feel the true impact of these stories and themes at that moment. Plus, back then I knew the gameplay was masterclass, but I couldn't quite put into words why that was the case. Fast forward to today. There I am, this time in an apartment, my Steam Deck in hand, ready to experience the Holy Trinity once again. This time though, I won't be going into the era of Strange Rail as a kid. I'll be taking to the skies as an adult this time, with the mission to fully understand and appreciate these games. And what better game to start with than the one that most people credit as the one to catapult this franchise into the spotlight for the first time. The first Ace Combat game on the PlayStation 2 and the 4th entry in the Ace Combat franchise as a whole, Ace Combat 4 Shattered Skies, also known as Distant Thunder in Europe, represents the combined experience gained from the previous entries. Combining the experience gained from the prototype that was Air Combat, the gameplay focus of Ace Combat 2, and the story focus of Ace Combat 3, Namco and the Ace Combat 4 project team set out to make this 4th entry their best one yet. Injected with the same levels of passion and dedication that the developers had for the first 3 games, Ace Combat 4 was a representation of everyone putting everything they had learned to the ultimate test. A test that, as a result of their hard work and dedication, they would pass with flying colors. A return to zero. Sounds like some kind of reference to Ace Combat 0, doesn't it? Well, what if I told you that this motto is what would go on to shape how Ace Combat 4 was developed when the game was first being designed? The Electrosphere staff, as they were called at the time, though the team would rename themselves as the Ace Combat 4 project team midway through development, fresh off the heels from having developed Ace Combat 3, wanted to start fresh with all of the knowledge and experience they had gained making the first 3 entries to the franchise. This mindset that what would become Ace Combat 4 was a reboot was emphasized right from the very beginning, with the team even going as far as to title the game Ace Combat 01 in early design docs to maintain that mindset. Retaining the core gameplay loop that had been figured out from their previous endeavors, the Ace Combat 4 project team focused on simply refining the gameplay more than making any drastic changes to the formula, while also finding a way to tell a new story but on a lower budget. While Ace Combat 3's animated cutscenes, made by production IG, were beautiful, they were also rather expensive. The high cost of animated cutscenes, plus with Ace Combat 3 being considered a financial failure amongst Namco, meant that the Ace Combat 4 project team couldn't afford to hire production IG again for this one. This is what led to the single-frame style of storytelling that was done by Studio 4 Degrees Celsius. Kazutoki Kono looks back on this now as a bit of a rude request for the game, as Studio 4 Degrees Celsius, an up-and-coming at the time animation studio, was asked to do still pictures. Like Kono said, pictures that don't move. Yeah. This is what also led to the expanded communications chatter that comes from both your allies and enemies during gameplay. Kono stated that if people could talk over the radio in the game, then the team might have been able to, quote, draw backgrounds that couldn't be drawn, and, quote, create a drama. This particular aspect of the comms chatter is really interesting to me. After having played Ace Combat 3, I thought that the expanded comms chatter was just something that the developers wanted to expand upon after having tried it out in a very light manner. Reading that at least part of why this change happened was actually due to wanting to flesh out the story more because of the budget constraints the team faced when making this game is really cool to me. It actually gives the expanded comms chatter some purpose. It wasn't just a decision for the sake of it. Even if this was just a decision for the sake of it, it still would have been a really beneficial and awesome one, but to see that there was a deeper reasoning behind it is once again really cool. This comms chatter is also what led the future Ace Combat games to go down the path that they did. Manabu Shimamoto says that the invention of this, quote, wireless system, as he calls it, is what decided the course of the subsequent Ace Combat games. Not only can we hear about how over the course of a campaign we go from a rookie in the skies at the beginning of the war to a feared ace by the end of it, but we also get to hear about how the fighting as a whole changes as we progress. Allies at the start when morale is down versus allies in the latter half when their morale gets a boost after hearing you'll be in the skies above them. Enemies confident they'll deliver the final blow in the first mission, only to have their blood go cold upon hearing you're in the air later on in the campaign. Hearing how desperate both sides get during their fight as the honor and nobility of war is sapped away as the fighting gets more desperate and intense on both sides. Not only is being able to hear the comms chatter from both sides really cool, it also plays a crucial role in the storytelling. Since you're in the air, you're more removed from the blood and guts of the ground and/or naval war raging down below. As a result, in order to fill you in on what's going on, hearing that comms chatter is crucial. On the note of names, while Ace Combat 01 would continue to be used in design docs during the early parts of development, eventually an official name would be given. That official name was revealed at the 2001 Spring Tokyo Game Show, where Ace Combat 01 officially became Ace Combat 4. This was also when the aforementioned name change from the Electrosphere team to the Ace Combat 4 project team happened. On July 6, 2001, the Japanese release date of September 13th was announced. Shortly after that, what has to be one of the best ways to promote an arcade flight action game took place on July 28th and 29th. At the Naval Air Facility at Tsugi, the annual Atsugi Air Show was taking place. So, Namco and the Ace Combat 4 project team decided to set up an Ace Combat 4 exhibition there. They had 4 trial stations, as they were called, allowing people to play a demo version of Ace Combat 4 while they were there. If someone got a certain points within their play session, they would get a physical copy of the demo disc for them to keep, and they got entry into a tournament of sorts. Though, unfortunately, there weren't any details like how the tournament was formatted, what kind of grand prize there was, etc. But going back to the setting, this is so cool to me. Having an exhibition set up for a demo of an upcoming arcade flight action game at a naval base surrounded by the very jets that you see and fly in the game is, again, it's so cool! Think about it. People got to play an early build of Ace Combat 4 surrounded by fighter jets. Can you imagine playing a demo of Ace Combat 8, or whatever the game will be called if not that, surrounded by your favorite aircraft at an exhibition? An F-22 Raptor in the front of the demo station, an F-14 Tomcat to your right, an F-15E Strike Eagle to your rear, an A-10 Warthog to your left, or whatever other group of aircraft you're personally thinking of. I don't know about you, but if I could play an Ace Combat game surrounded by military aircraft, I would be in heaven. Shifting the focus to some of the concept art and designs of this game, while there wasn't anything majorly groundbreaking or anything that made my jaw drop in sudden realization of anything, it was still really neat to see all of this. We've seen the cutscenes and characters so many times in the finished game that to see pictures like these serves as a really nice peek into how the development process went. Seeing the storyboards for how the game's tale of the war from Yellow Squadron's eyes as you fight them and Erusia as a whole would happen, seeing concept art of the characters and jets, cassettes, even some VHS tapes of Ace Combat 4's cutscenes as well. It's all really neat. I will admit, I do wish there was more info about the work in the trenches for this game, as in information about specific levels, what inspired the idea of the story, not the format, but the decision to have the story cutscenes be through the enemy's perspective through the narrator, any cut content like what jets were scrapped or if any story beats were changed, things like that. While typing through this script, I actually went for a Hail Mary and sent a message to Bandai Namco through their website asking if there was any chance I could get more information about Ace Combat 4's development. I didn't expect it to work, and given how I sent that message on October 30th, and as I'm recording this script it is November 24th with no reply, I'm going to assume I'm not going to get that additional info. At least I tried though. When looking at this game's development, it rattled my senses a little. Usually, when there's a follow-up to an entry in a series, it usually means that entry was successful, at least financially speaking. So to read that another Ace Combat entry was given the green light after the previous one had been deemed a financial failure is pretty surprising. The Ace Combat 4 project team had less money and less time than Ace Combat 3, at least assuming they waited until the international versions were released, and yet they somehow managed to make a game that is still considered among the best of the best to this day. I'm aware that pressure makes diamonds, but oftentimes the pressure usually results in a mess given how complex and time-consuming game development is. Maybe it was the fresh start that the developers were giving themselves that allowed them some peace of mind. Maybe it was the sheer will and determination each of them had to pick themselves up and make something to show Namco they still had what it took. Whatever the case, the developers should still to this day be proud of what they accomplished here. From the visuals, to the story, to what we'll be focusing on next, the gameplay. Buttery smooth. Those are the two words I would use to describe Ace Combat 4's gameplay. This is most definitely a game not developed by Todd Howard because everything just works when it comes to how this game plays. Instead of any major adjustments to the gameplay, the differences between this game and the latest entry in the franchise at that time, Ace Combat 3, are further adjustments to add that extra sense of polish necessary to the formula. If Ace Combat 3 was the series having figured out the formula, more or less, then Ace Combat 4 was the game that truly set it in stone. Ace Combat 4 follows the same kind of gameplay loop of there being a mission briefing, followed up by you being able to pick your aircraft and weapons, followed up by the mission itself, which takes place in a sandbox type environment. The briefing is more or less the same, with the briefing officer instructing you on what needs to be done for the mission at hand, while allowing you to get a brief 3D preview of the battlefield. This isn't a guaranteed placement of allies and enemies, rather it's more of a general placement so you can have a rough idea as to how the environment will look. Paying attention to the briefing officer and the mission objectives is more crucial this time around thanks to one of the larger adjustments found here for the special weapons. Regardless of whichever aircraft you fly, you will be able to pick from a group of either 2 or 3 special weapons, each with their own different specializations against air, ground, or naval threats. The special weapons have been updated with descriptions of each rather than just a name and stats bars, allowing players to be better informed about the weapon's performance. You've got your multi-lock-on XMAAs and XLAAs for air-to-air threats, your overpowered QAAMs, your UGBs of different sizes, LASMs for ships, and more. Each jet comes with your standard cannon and standard missiles as well. This is all important as the return line makes its debut in this game. Some of the missions in the campaign are a bit longer than usual, those being the score attack missions that also make their debut to the franchise here. These missions ask you to achieve a minimum number of points within a time limit, and from that point on, you can continue to attack enemies to get a higher rank. If you run out of ammo, you can head back to the return line to not only have your ammo refilled, but also to potentially swap your special weapon depending on the battle situation at hand. Did you clear out all of the ground and naval threats in Mission 6 Invincible Fleet? Well, swap over to the XMAAs to deal with the remaining air threats, to give one example. On the easier difficulties, you can also have your aircraft's damage repaired, but on the harder difficulties, you just get your ammo refilled with no repairs. On the note of the aircraft themselves, there are 21 different aircraft that you can fly in this game, ranging from the F-14, the F-18, the F-15C, the F-22, and of course, I have to mention the XO2 Wyvern as well, to name just a few. All of these aircraft are balanced perfectly for how far you are into the campaign, with different jets being unlocked at different points in the game with gradually better performance depending on how far you are. The enemies fly different sorts of aircraft depending on how far you are into the campaign as well. They fly starter aircraft at the beginning, mid-performance aircraft in the middle, and some of the higher-end aircraft can be found towards the end. Once you pick your aircraft and special weapon, it's time to take to the skies. Here is where things are going to get a little tricky for me to describe, because when I say that the gameplay is buttery smooth, it's one of those things where you'll need to have played this game yourself to really understand what I mean. It's one of those cases where you as a viewer can go, this gameplay looks fun, but it'll only really click when you play it yourself. The best way that I can describe how the gameplay is to anyone who hasn't played it themselves is that this game lets you get into the flow. You know what I mean, right? Regardless of whatever game you're playing, you know how you sometimes go into a zen-like state where everything just clicks for you for a little bit? All of your shots are on point in a first-person shooter. You're able to nail back-to-back difficult jumps in a platformer. You're able to complete a lap around a circuit perfectly in a racing game. Here in Ace Combat 4, I found myself having those moments where I was in a sort of flow where I was able to really be one with my aircraft as I found the perfect flight path and angle of attack on a set of targets. I never really felt that when playing the first 3 Ace Combat titles personally. The perfect mix of the smooth frame rate, how the aircraft moves, the different weapons at your disposal, even things like the comms chatter immersing you in the mission, and the awesome kick-ass soundtrack of this game can all lead to having those zen state moments where you're an unstoppable ace in the skies. With every enemy air, ground, and naval asset you destroy, you'll be adding points to your score. At the end of the mission, depending on how much score you have, you'll be given one of 4 different possible ranks: C, B, A, or S. C being the bare minimum needed to pass the mission, and S being the rank of a true ace, going above and beyond the mission requirements. Whatever rank you get, plus other factors such as how much time was remaining when you completed a mission and how many enemies you destroyed, will all be added up to give you credits. These credits are then used to buy aircraft and special weapons. You can also buy 2 different paint schemes of each aircraft to go along with the default one that you're given for free, and for the large majority of them, one of those paint schemes is the one that belongs to an enemy ace. Aside from the F4, Su-37, and XO-2 with different unlock conditions for their second special paint job, every other aircraft's second paint job belongs to one of the numerous enemy aces that appear throughout the campaign. Shooting down an enemy ace gives you a decent boost in points as they have more advanced AI when compared to the standard enemies. And you get the aforementioned paint scheme for that aircraft if it's your first time shooting that ace down. Before we move on to some of the peripherals of the gameplay, there's one more thing I need to talk about: Stonehenge. Up to this point, we've had super weapons in Ace Combat before. Air Combat had the Aerial Fortress, Ace Combat 2 had Fortress Intolerance in the bonus ending, Ace Combat 3 had the Sferna. Ace Combat 4 having Stonehenge is different from all of the super weapons that came before it in a lot of ways. Firstly, Stonehenge is a threat that looms over you for a decent part of the campaign. While you're not dodging Stonehenge's fire every mission, whenever you do find yourself in a mission that takes place within this circle, you get that quick, oh shit, moment in realization. It also doesn't help that the only way to dodge Stonehenge's attacks is by flying below 2,000 feet, which puts you at risk of crashing into something or taking enemy fire if enemy anti-air is directly below you. Secondly, Stonehenge is a threat that is present but not visible in the actual gameplay until you confront it directly in Stonehenge Offensive. We can get an idea in our heads of how they look when firing, but we don't get that small bit of comfort visually seeing the super weapon in question. Instead, whenever Stonehenge fires, we can't see what's attacking us. We just have to dive down and hope for the best. Thirdly, when we do finally confront Stonehenge itself in Stonehenge Offensive, it's an awesome super weapon fight, taking out the defending reinforcements and the turrets one by one, while the threat of being shot down is still there. Of course from the enemy anti-air and enemy fighters, but if you happen to fly in front of a Stonehenge turret when it fires, it's still game over. Regarding any criticisms or gripes I have with Ace Combat 4's gameplay, the only thing that I have in mind are very basic and surface level things. While I do agree that sometimes the score attack missions can drag on for a bit, especially Whiskey Corridor, I also personally find it fun to just go out there and destroy as many targets as possible and clean up that minimap. My highest score in Anchorhead Raid and Ace Combat 7 should be a clear enough indication of that. I'm also not fond of how the AA guns always manage to get a percent of damage or two on you no matter how fast you're going or your angle of attack. It's a pet peeve more than anything, but I did still feel like mentioning it here. Aside from that though, I've got no other gripes with the gameplay. I'm serious, that's it. Moving on to the peripherals to the gameplay, the visuals in this game have that effect of reminding me of a more simple time. Anyone who has had a nostalgia rush and played an older game can attest that sometimes whether or not the graphics hold up can be random. Sometimes you'll look at an old game and go, oh god, wait, were the graphics always this bad? Other times you'll go, wow, these graphics hold up really nicely. And then there are cases where obviously the graphics are nowhere near where they are today, but they have that charm to them. That kind of charm that makes you almost prefer those graphics in comparison to the more realistic 4K, Ultra HD, RTX on stuff available today. That's the kind of feeling I get with Ace Combat 4. I cannot deny that Ace Combat 7 looks beautiful, stunning, and gorgeous. Seeing all of the aircraft and environment so detailed, how sharp and sleek the menus are, and how perfectly modern the HUD is, it's all eye candy for me. At the same time though, I find Ace Combat 4's graphics to be just as appealing to look at. Maybe there's a correlation of these graphics and me living in more simple times when I was younger when I first got to play this game for myself. I'm absolutely willing to chalk up part of my emotions towards nostalgia here, as this is the same kind of feeling I get whenever I look at games like Ace Combat 5 and 0, for instance. But I do think that these graphics are genuinely great for their time too. Moving on to the sound design, the Ace Combat 4 project team absolutely nailed it here. The sounds of your jet engines firing up when you hit the afterburners are perfect, the lock-on tone is perfect, the sound of the explosions, the comms chatter on both sides, it's all excellent. On the note of the sound in this game, let's talk about the soundtrack next. Rather than sticking with primarily a single genre of music for this game's music combines rock, synth, and orchestral elements. Composed primarily by Tetsukazu Nakanishi and Hiroshi Okubo, with Keiki Kobayashi having developed a few tracks for this game as well, Ace Combat 4's soundtrack is widely regarded as not only one of the best soundtracks this series has to offer, but also a critical turning point for Ace Combat music as well. We went from a rock focus to air combat and Ace Combat 2 to an electric/techno focus in Ace Combat 3 to this blending of elements together in Ace Combat 4. While future games would continue to be diverse with their soundtracks, this method of combining different elements together would be the main method of how Ace Combat soundtracks would be developed moving forward. Real quick though, let's focus on Keiki Kobayashi for a little bit. Kobayashi is a legendary figure in the Ace Combat community nowadays as an ace of music. Over the years, he's had the honor and privilege of being a sound design team director, a music composer, and a live orchestra director in his career. Kobayashi is so well known and so popular that he often gets miscredited with composing tracks that he in fact did not compose. And I, unfortunately, am guilty of that too. Kobayashi has become such an icon of Ace Combat sound and music design that it's crazy to think about an Ace Combat game being made without him today. Well, for the first 3 Ace Combat games, he was not part of the team yet. Kobayashi was not amongst the Electrosphere staff before they renamed themselves as the Ace Combat 4 project team. He joined midway through development. In other words, Ace Combat 4 is the very first Ace Combat game that this man worked on. Given that he still needed to prove himself to Namco, Kobayashi was under a lot of pressure to deliver. Thankfully, he was able to deliver despite that pressure, producing some of the most well-known and loved tracks in Ace Combat 4 and the series as a whole, ranging from Blockade, to Operation Bunker Shot, Two of the tracks that, no doubt in my mind, were the ones to convince Namco that Kobayashi belonged: Rex Tremende and Megalith. Now, let's not have Kobayashi hog the spotlight here. Tetsukazu Nakanishi and Hiroshi Okubo deserve some time in the spotlight too here, as the tracks they composed were all really well done too. Some of my personal favorites from them are Escort, Farbanti, Deep Strike, and of course, Comona. You didn't think I was going to forget this awesome track in particular, did you? Ace Combat 4's gameplay being so smooth where everything works seamlessly together would already make this game a highly regarded title. But there's another element to this game that elevates it from a highly regarded title to a legendary one. A title worthy of being among the Holy Trinity. The story. Throughout the campaign, in the midst of all the standard enemies that would still put up a good fight, there would be a squadron that showed up every once in a while that was a cut above the rest. An enemy squadron that would have my allies in a panic and have me humbled at their skill. Yellow Squadron. These were the pilots in charge of protecting Stonehenge, the network of railguns that had been converted from anti-asteroid to anti-air use. Or they were sent on distant operations to reinforce Erusian fronts when things started getting bad over there. Out of all the pilots in that squadron, there was one who was an equivalent to Mobius 1. Yellow 13. At a first glance, Yellow 13 was shaping up to be an unfeeling, cold-hearted ace that would shoot down whoever dared to cross his path, only to be boastful about how his country will win the war when returning back home. Yet, when we do see glimpses of how Yellow 13 and the rest of his fellow pilots act, it's surprising. Games that tell the story through the eyes of the antagonist while you play as the protagonist in the moment-to-moment gameplay are not as common, and for good reason. It's much more difficult to achieve a compelling story of that nature, and yet, Ace Combat 4, having gone above and beyond in all other areas, wasn't about to let its lesson go unheard. A lesson on respecting your enemies in the midst of war. October 1994. Jonathan Payek, a professor at Sealsbridge University, discovers an asteroid. After further research about it is done at the Comona Islands, a terrifying discovery is made. This asteroid that would go on to be given the name Ulysses 1994XF04, or just Ulysses for short, would pass by in 1999 with a high likelihood of crashing into the planet. Once the official announcement was made to the world in 1996, countries all around the world began to prepare. In relation to the events of Ace Combat 4, the countries that are a part of the Eurasian continent would develop Stonehenge, a network of railguns that were built to shoot at the asteroid, breaking it into smaller pieces to reduce as much damage to the planet as possible. As predicted, Ulysses arrived in July of 1999, and despite all of the preparation that everyone did, the aftermath was devastating. Over 500,000 people died. Eusia's infrastructure as a whole collapsed. A refugee crisis was created with millions of people having lost their homes. This became known as the Eusian refugee crisis, with countries all over the Eusian continent setting up guidelines and quotas for how many refugees each country would allow into their borders. Eurasia was one such country, but in April of 2000, citing economic troubles and it being impossible to take in more refugees as a result, the restrictions they imposed on visa applications effectively barred anyone else from getting in. That didn't stop the refugees from getting as close as they could to Eurasia, with there being a total of 600,000 of them at the country's borders at one point. Eurasian exports became blocked as other countries disapproved of Eurasia's actions, putting the country in an even more desperate situation. Having been backed into a corner, and with tensions rising with the neighboring countries, in the summer of 2003, Eurasia launched a surprise invasion of San Sebastian and the Stonehenge railgun network. In response, the remaining countries banded together as the Independent State Allied Forces, and open war broke out shortly thereafter. Eurasia uses the Stonehenge railguns to devastating effect, swatting down ISAF air power from long range as Eusia is taken over, slowly but surely over the course of the year. Eventually, ISAF is forced to retreat to North Point, where not only do they make their last stand, but this is also when Mobius 1 enters the picture, on September 19th, 2004. While the main story of the game has you playing as Mobius 1 recapturing the land that Eurasia has taken over, and going from just another ISAF pilot at the start to the backbone of ISAF as a whole later into the war, there's another critical component of the story: the enemy's perspective as told through a narrator as he recollects what he remembers about the war when he was a kid. The narrator lived in San Sebastian at the time, having been forced to move there as Yellow 13 indirectly killed his parents after shooting down an ISAF fighter, the ISAF fighter crashing into the narrator's house. Being forced to live with his drunken uncle at a bar, the narrator remembers his time living in the Eurasian-occupied town, and specifically remembers his time with none other than Yellow 13 and the rest of Yellow Squad. At first, it's understandable to not have the best impression of Yellow 13 on your first playthrough. Even if it was accidental, Yellow 13 being the one to shoot down the ISAF fighter from earlier, he was the one who indirectly killed the narrator's parents. After he makes his first in-game appearance in the mission Lifeline, he's without question an enemy to be scared of at first. All we need now is for him to be boastful, arrogant, cocky, a self-proclaimed god of the sky who can never be touched, and we've got our main villain right there. But when we get to have more time with Yellow 13 through the game's cutscenes as we progress through the campaign, we find out that he's not so bad. Rather than being arrogant and cocky, he's humble. Rather than being proud of the number of confirmed kills he's got, he takes pride in never having lost a squad mate, at least during the first half of the game anyway, when that statement is still true. Small things that Yellow 13 does, like holding and petting a rescued puppy after the runway he and his squadron uses gets bombed by the San Sebastian resistance, or how he openly states how he wishes to be truly challenged by an ace pilot, feeling compassion towards the weaker adversaries he downs, or openly stating that he won't complain if he dies in the skies, but the thought of being taken out on the ground is something that's incomprehensible to him. He and the rest of Yellow Squadron, along with the crew that oversees their jets and other equipment, take the narrator under their wing. They let the narrator see the jets up close, let him watch as the jets take off on a mission, let him try on their oversized flight suits. They even complain to the narrator about problems when ISAF begins their counterattack. As the narrator puts it, he finds a home in their company. When Mobius 1 becomes the ace of ISAF, Yellow 13 has a sense of excitement and joy as he realizes if that ISAF pilot stays alive long enough, he could get that duel he yearns for. And what has to be the biggest indication of Yellow 13's character happens after Stonehenge offensive. When Mobius 1 single-handedly destroys all of the Stonehenge railguns and shoots down Yellow 4, Yellow 13's closest wingman, Yellow 13 still gives credit where it's due. He doesn't scream to everyone in the bar about how Mobius 1 will regret having scarred Yellow Squadron like this. He doesn't swear that he'll kill Mobius 1 if it's the last thing he does. He still feels the human emotion of anger, sadness, and grief. But he also knows that Mobius 1 was just doing his job. Just as on a first playthrough we get humbled by Yellow 13 at the end of Lifeline, we get to humble Yellow 13 at the end of Stonehenge Offensive. From that point on, as ISAF captures more territory, as more Yellow Squadron pilots are lost, and as ISAF eventually begins their assault on Farbani, Yellow 13 keeps his cool through it all. He knows that even if the war will be lost, he still needs to do his job, just as Mobius 1 needs to do his. Two pilots who have respect for one another, destined to clash as their orders are polar opposites. By the end of it all, after having seen how Yellow 13 behaves and acts, even when the war is all but lost for him and Erusea, we can't help but to be upset at the fact he's an enemy. It makes us wonder what it would be like to fly alongside him rather than against him. Mobius 1 and Yellow 13 teamed up together. In an alternate universe, perhaps. But in this one, we have our orders, just as Yellow 13 has his. And, above all else, even if Yellow 13's sortie above Farbani would be his last, he got that duel with Mobius 1 he desperately yearned for.
Target destroyed by Mobius 1. Box 2. Missile hit. That's a kill. Great job. There are no aircraft remaining on radar.
In the moment-to-moment gameplay, as stated before, it's about how you as Mobius 1 goes from just another ordinary ISAF pilot to ISAF's ultimate ace. That wireless system that was mentioned in the development section of this video kicks in here, as the comms chatter from both your allies and enemies reflect this. At the start of the campaign, because Mobius 1 has yet to prove himself as the ace of ISAF, not much attention is given his way. It's when you progress later in the game that people start to really take notice, particularly when Mobius 1 destroys all of the Stonehenge railguns.
Destroyed. Good going. Go for it, Mobius 1. Take it out. 5 targets remaining. 4 remaining. Target destroyed by Mobius 1. He's grabbing all the glory. Target destruction confirmed. Target destroyed. I repeat, Mobius 1 has destroyed the target. Holy! Yahoo!
It's from this point on that the wireless system really kicks in, at least in regard to how Mobius 1 is perceived. Being able to convey your importance to the war effort through just audio is super impressive. You don't see the action from the perspective of the ground troops in this game. You don't see the carnage going on down there. You don't see anyone's faces as they speak. It's just voice acting. That's it. And it's through that voice acting that the game is able to convey that you, Mobius 1, are an unstoppable ace.
Mobius 1, Box 2. Mobius 1 sure to create an opening for us. Kill all, Mobius 1. So that's Mobius 1.
Ace Combat having you as an unstoppable ace of the skies had actually been done in the first 3 entries, just in different ways. In air combat, you already had the reputation of an unstoppable ace when being hired by the legitimate government. Same thing in Ace Combat 2. In Ace Combat 3, while no armies are singing your praises, you are seen as an ace pilot by your colleagues of whichever faction you stick with. It's here in Ace Combat 4 where the now iconic staple of you starting out as just another pilot of the country you're a part of, only to become the backbone of the country's armed forces later on, really started. Having Mobius 1 be seen as just another fellow pilot and nobody really special at the start is perfect for when you begin. At the start of the campaign, you're getting your bearings still, understanding how the game mechanics and aircraft work, which can be translated to Mobius 1 getting used to flying in combat. Later on, as you get more and more experience, you get better. You're able to identify when's the best time to fire your missiles. You're able to line up ground targets for strafe runs better. You know how to get an enemy off your 6 and to have the hunter become the hunted. By the latter half of the campaign, you've earned the title of the Grim Reaper, the Ribbon Fighter, with how efficient your flying is by that point. Your status as an Ace of the Skies is at its most apparent when you and your allies take off for Megalith. I want to focus on this mission for a little bit, as this is the perfect finale to a campaign. The briefing music for all of the other missions have been either serious or upbeat, depending on where ISAF is at in the war. The serious briefing music plays for the first half of the campaign when ISAF is on the defensive,
Here is the current sitrep and your orders for deployment, effective immediately. Enemy agents destroyed our early warning radar network, allowing several bear bombers to penetrate our airspace.
while the upbeat music plays after the turning point in the war happens when you destroy Stonehenge.
A returning U-2 recon plane with engine trouble is currently passing through Gnome Ravine due to its inability to climb to higher altitudes. However, airship-mounted noise jammers in the area are preventing the use of radar.
This mission, however...
A group of young Erusian officers have taken over Megalith, the superweapon that was under development. Megalith is a rocket launch facility that can shoot down asteroid fragments in orbit. The only way to destroy this highly dangerous and fortified facility is to hit it from the inside.
Megalith isn't just an ordinary facility where the last of the Erusians who still want to fight are holding out. Remember Ulysses? Well, some of the fragments from that asteroid are still stuck in orbit surrounding the planet. Megalith is equipped with missiles that could be used to make impact with those asteroids. In other words, Erusia is ready to use Megalith to weaponize these asteroid fragments to reduce the ISAF-controlled Usia to ashes. In response, ISAF deploys not just Mobius 1, but Mobius Squadron, paired up with a special operations team to destroy Megalith. After flying through the whole war as just Mobius 1, this time you're given a whole squadron to lead, as the newly formed Yellow Squadron consisting of rookie pilots exclaims, This Yellow Squadron defending Megalith is nowhere close to the Yellow Squadron we've encountered throughout the rest of the game. The pilots call each other by name and not call sign. A sense of dread and fear on their part is established when they realize all of the ISAF fighters are bearing that ribbon insignia. And these Yellow Squadron fighters are easier to shoot down. Whether or not the in-game AI is actually toned down, it feels easier due to the experience gained from having fought through the war up to this point. Once Yellow Squadron is cleared, you perform the tunnel runs for the generators, and then the final missile in the center of the facility. As I gave my cheer after seeing Mobius 1 fly out of that missile silo, I knew that the war was over. Although AWACS Sky Eye was right when he said that history determines the winner, he was also right when he said that heroes really do exist. Mobius 1, and by extension we as Ace Combat players, our heroes. In Ace Combat 4's case, all of us are heroes who were just doing our jobs, with a surprising amount of respect for the enemy. This game granted us the ability to be powerful, to become an unstoppable force. But it also taught us that respect and honor can be found, even in war. Ace Combat 4 is without a shadow of a doubt worthy of being called one of the 3 Holy Trinity titles, from its gameplay, to the innovations and polish, to the story it tells. Which leads me to my final conclusion about this game. Ace Combat 4 is a game that we're lucky even got the green light looking back on it. Again, Ace Combat 3 was considered a financial failure. When a financial flop in a series happens, that usually means the next entry is given a smaller budget and less time to work with as a cost-saving measure, if the series itself isn't cancelled entirely. So to not only have an entry be this good, but to also have its development be as supported as it seemingly was, is quite surprising to me. There weren't any mentions about rushed deadlines or harsh working conditions or anything of the sort. If anything, Namco seemed to be fully supportive of the Ace Combat 4 project team. I think instances such as being willing to help the developers make an appearance at an air show to show off demos of the game is evidence enough. That detail is still so awesome to me. And the result? The reboot of the Ace Combat franchise that everyone was looking for. A game that not only plays well, a game that not only tells a story well, but a game that would go on to define the course of the series for years to come. Having played this game with a more analytical pair of eyes this time around, this personal project of mine has given me a new sense of appreciation for this game. I still appreciated this game for what it was back then, don't get me wrong. I was able to get fully immersed in the gameplay and the story, but having learned about this game's development, how determined and passionate the developers were, it all makes me appreciate this game even more. A fresh start for Ace Combat and the beginning of what is considered the golden era for this franchise, Ace Combat 4 Shattered Skies, or Distant Thunder, has rightfully earned its place in the Holy Trinity.